3 words. Just 3 words were enough to silence the most feared man in history, and the man who uttered those words never spoke them again in public. Have you ever wondered about the limits of your silence? How far you would go before speaking the truth no one wants to hear? This isn't just a story of a confrontation, it's the story of a moment when courage met absolute evil and won. But those 3 words, they carried a weight you can't imagine. A weight that changed everything. Forever. Maximilian Kolbe knew he was going to die. He knew it from the moment he decided to speak. But there was something bigger than death, something that needed to be said. And when he finally spoke, the silence that followed was deafening. Germany, 1941. The world was plunged into the deepest darkness humanity had ever known. Hitler had built a death machine that worked with the precision of a Swiss watch. But in that room, at that specific moment, everything stopped. Can you imagine the sound of Hitler himself being rendered speechless? The man who had hypnotized an entire nation with his fiery speeches simply fell silent. Kolbe stood there, knowing that every word could be his last. But he had a mission that came from a place far deeper than fear. And then, when Hitler asked that question, no one dared to answer. Kolbe looked him in the eyes, into the eyes of the devil himself, and he spoke 3 words that echoed through the room like gunshots. But to understand the power of those words, you need to know the man who spoke them, because Maximilian Kolbe wasn't an ordinary man. He was someone who had found something Hitler could never destroy. The truth. 1894, Poland. A boy is born into a simple family. Raymond Kolbe. Nothing about him suggested he would one day face evil incarnate. Nothing except one thing. His mother said he was different. There was something in his eyes, a determination that both frightened and comforted. At the age of 10, Raymond had a vision. The Virgin Mary appeared to him, offering 2 crowns, one white representing purity, one red representing martyrdom. He chose both. At that moment, without knowing it, he was sealing his destiny, the destiny that would lead him to that room, to that confrontation, to those 3 words. Have you ever felt that your life had a higher purpose, that you were being prepared for something specific, even without understanding what? Kolbe felt this since childhood, and he dedicated his entire life to preparing for a moment he didn't yet know. He became a Franciscan, took the name Maximilian, and decided that his life would be a war. Not a war with weapons, but a war against darkness itself. In 1917, he founded the Militia of the Immaculate, an organization dedicated to converting souls, especially the most lost souls, the ones furthest from the light. But there was something more. Kolbe had an obsession that many didn't understand. He wanted to convert the Jews, not out of hatred, quite the opposite, out of love. He saw in them God's chosen people, and he couldn't accept that they were separated from the truth he had found. It was a dangerous obsession, an obsession that would put him directly in the path of the most anti-Semitic regime in history. Kolbe wrote articles defending the dignity of the Jewish people. He organized public debates about the importance of interfaith dialogue. He even learned Hebrew to better understand Jewish scriptures. His superiors constantly warned him, "Father, this is dangerous. Times are changing. Be more careful." But Kolbe always had the same answer. If we don't speak the truth when it's dangerous, when will we speak it? It was a philosophy that would define his entire life, and that would inevitably lead him to that final moment. He didn't back down. He never backed down. 1930, Kolbe travels to Japan, a country that had yet to know Christianity. He wants to establish a mission there to convert an entire country. It's madness. A Polish priest alone, trying to convert Japan. But something extraordinary happens. In 6 years, he manages to create one of the fastest growing Christian communities in the country. Thousands of conversions. reported miracles. People said there was something supernatural about him, that when he spoke, the words penetrated directly into the soul. Have you ever met someone like that? Someone whose mere presence changed the atmosphere? Someone who carried an authority that didn't come from this world? That's how people described Kolbe, and that authority would be crucial in that final moment. 1936. Kolbe returns to Poland. Nazism is growing in Germany. The shadows are lengthening over Europe. But Kolbe is not intimidated. On the contrary, he intensifies his mission. He creates one of the largest Catholic publishing houses in the world, near Pokolanów, the city of the Immaculate. It was a community of almost 1,000 religious, all dedicated to a single mission, spreading the truth through the written word. And here, something important. Kolbe wasn't just a mystic. He was a strategist. He understood the power of communication, the power of a well-targeted message. He created magazines, newspapers, radio programs. He was building a Catholic media empire, an empire that would soon be seen as a threat, because there was something about Kolbe's publications that bothered people. They spoke of human dignity, of the infinite value of each soul, of the fundamental equality of all men. Dangerous ideas for those who wanted to build a world based on racial superiority. 1939. Germany invades Poland. World War II begins, and near Pokolanów becomes something even more dangerous, a refuge. Kolbe opens his doors to Jewish refugees, to Polish resistance fighters, to anyone who needs shelter. It was an act of direct resistance, an act that he knew would be punished, but something deeper was happening. Kolbe was preparing himself, preparing for the confrontation he knew was coming. He began to have more frequent visions, dreams where he saw a final battle between light and darkness. And in all those dreams, he was there, in the center of the battle. Have you ever had the feeling that you were being prepared for something greater, that your whole life was converging on a specific moment? That's what Kolbe felt, and that certainty made him dangerous. February 17th, 1941. The Gestapo arrives at Pokolanów. They know about the refugees. They know about the resistance. They know about Kolbe. And above all, they know about his influence. Because Kolbe wasn't just a priest. He was a leader. Someone people followed. Someone whose word carried weight. The kind of person totalitarian regimes fear most. Kolbe is imprisoned along with 5 other friars. They're taken to Pawiak prison in Warsaw, a prison known for its brutality. But even there, something extraordinary happens. Kolbe continues to lead. He continues to inspire. The other prisoners begin to gather around him. He celebrates Mass in secret. He hears confessions. He offers hope where there should only be despair. The guards notice, and they're disturbed. How can a man maintain his faith in a place like that? How does he manage to radiate peace in the midst of hell? There's something about him they can't break, and that scares them. May 28th, 1941. Kolbe is transferred to Auschwitz, the concentration camp that would become synonymous with absolute evil. He receives the number 16670. From that moment on, theoretically, he ceases to be a person. He becomes just a number. But Kolbe refuses to be reduced to a number. He remains who he always was, a man of God, a man with a mission. And in Auschwitz, his mission intensifies, because there in the heart of darkness, souls need light more than ever. He begins to minister to the other prisoners, in secret of course, but with a dedication that impresses even the most hopeless. And then, something happens that will change everything. A prisoner escapes from Auschwitz. It's an unwritten rule. When someone escapes, 10 others are selected to die. It's the Nazis' way of discouraging escape attempts. That day, 10 men are chosen at random. Among them is Franciszek Gajowniczek, a married man with children. When his name is called, Gajowniczek cries out, "My wife, my children, I'll never see them again." It's a cry of despair that echoes through the camp, a cry that breaks the heart of anyone who still has a heart. And then something unthinkable happens. A man steps out of line, calmly, without being called, without permission. It's Kolbe. He walks up to the Nazi officer responsible for the selection, looks him in the eye, and speaks. But these aren't the three words that silenced Hitler. Not yet. This is just the preparation, the prelude. Kolbe offers to die in Gajovnicek's place. He's accepted. Along with the other 9, he's taken to the starvation bunker, a bunker where they will be left to die of hunger and thirst. Slowly, painfully. But even there, Kolbe doesn't stop being who he is. He leads the other prisoners in prayer. He sings hymns. He offers comfort. The guards are disturbed. There are no screams coming from the bunker, no despair, only peace. How is this possible? After 2 weeks, only Kolbe is still alive. The others died one by one, but he remains weak but conscious. Weak, but still radiating a strength that no one can explain. The Nazis grow impatient. They decide to accelerate the process. They inject carbolic acid into his veins. Kolbe extends his arm willingly, looks into the executioner's eyes, and whispers a prayer. August 14th, 1941. Maximilian Kolbe dies, officially. But his story doesn't end there. In fact, that's where it really begins. Because news of his death spreads quickly, and something extraordinary happens. People begin to talk about him as if he were a saint. Miracles are reported, inexplicable cures, and most importantly, his story reaches the ears of important people in the upper echelons of the Nazi regime. Because Kolbe's death wasn't just the death of a prisoner, it was the death of a symbol that was becoming dangerous. And this is where our story takes an unexpected turn, because Hitler heard about Kolbe. He heard about the priest who died singing hymns, about the man who transformed a death bunker into a chapel. And it bothered him deeply. You need to understand, Hitler wasn't just a dictator. He was a man obsessed with symbols, with narratives, with controlling not only the bodies, but the souls of people. And Kolbe represented something he couldn't control, a force that came from a place his weapons couldn't reach. So Hitler made a decision that few know about. He wanted to know more about this priest. He wanted to understand where his strength came from. And most importantly, he wanted to find a way to destroy his legacy. And that's what led him to that moment, to that confrontation that would change everything. Because although Kolbe had died physically, his presence was still alive. His example still inspired resistance, his memory still bothered, and Hitler couldn't stand being bothered by a dead man. So he called a meeting, a secret meeting, with the top leaders of the regime. And he asked a question no one expected. How can a dead man still threaten us? The room fell silent. No one knew how to answer, how to explain the power of an example, how to quantify the strength of a sacrifice. And it was in this moment of awkward silence that something inexplicable happened. A voice echoed through the room, a voice that shouldn't have been there, a voice that everyone recognized, but that no one could explain. It was the voice of Kolbe, and these were the 3 words he spoke. But wait. Take a deep breath and pause for a moment, because what you're about to hear will change your perception of everything. About power, about courage, about what really matters when all is lost. Are you ready to know the words that silence the most powerful man in the world? So let's go back to that room, Berlin, late 1941. Hitler has just asked his question, how can a dead man still threaten us? The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Himmler was there, Goebbels too, the most feared men of the Reich, and none of them knew what to say. It was a question that exposed the fundamental weakness of the regime. They could control bodies, they could silence voices, but they couldn't kill an idea. They couldn't erase an example. And then, in that moment of excruciating silence, something no one expected happened. A presence filled the room. It wasn't physical. It was something beyond the physical. It was as if the very air had changed, and everyone felt it, even Hitler. He looked around, disturbed. His generals were restless. There was something there that shouldn't have been, something that didn't belong in that place of darkness. And then Hitler did something he rarely did. He admitted ignorance. Who was this Kolbe, after all? What was so special about him? It was Himmler who answered. Himmler, who had studied the case personally. Himmler, who was secretly fascinated and terrified by that priest. Mein Führer, he was different. Our men in Auschwitz reported strange things. He didn't break, not even under torture. It was as if he possessed a strength from somewhere else, a power beyond the mortal realm. Hitler exploded. Strength! What strength? He died like any other. Yes, sir, but the way he died. The other prisoners, they began to see him as a saint. Some of the guards, they were disturbed. Disturbed how? Himmler hesitated. It was difficult to explain the inexplicable. They said, when he looked at them, it was as if he saw through them, as if he knew their deepest secrets. Some guards requested transfers. They said they couldn't sleep anymore. Hitler slammed his fist on the table. Superstition, weakness. But deep down, he knew there was something more, because he himself had felt something similar, not with Kolbe directly, but with others, people who carried this same light, and that light terrified him more than any enemy army, because it exposed what he truly was, behind all the rhetoric, behind all the power, behind all the adoration of the masses. He was just a man, a small man, a man filled with fear. And it was in this moment of vulnerability, this moment when Hitler was closest to admitting his own fragility, that it happened. The voice, clear, serene, impossible. I am a man. 3 words, simple, direct, devastating. The room grew cold, literally cold. The air conditioning wasn't on, but everyone felt a sharp drop in temperature. More than that, it was as if time itself had stopped, as if those words had created a bubble of different reality within the room. Hitler leaped to his feet, his chair screeched against the floor. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. He looked around, his eyes desperate, searching for a logical explanation for what had just happened. Who said that? Who spoke? His voice was different, higher pitched. There was panic there. The same man who commanded entire armies was terrified of 3 words whispered by a dead man. No one answered, because no one had spoken, at least no one who was alive. But everyone heard. Everyone felt the weight of those words. It was as if they had materialized in the air, as if they had taken on physical form. Himmler was pale. Goebbels had stopped breathing. The most seasoned generals, men who had seen it all on battlefields, were trembling. I am a man. The words continued to echo, not in the air, but inside the mind of every person in that room, like a broken record playing the same song endlessly. And suddenly, Hitler understood. He understood why that priest had bothered him so much. He understood why his death had become a greater threat than his life. Because Kolbe had done something Hitler could never do. He had accepted his humanity completely, without reservation, without fear. Hitler had spent his entire life running from his own humanity, building layers upon layers of power, titles, adoration, to hide what he truly was beneath it all. A boy rejected by the Vienna Academy of Arts, a man who could never maintain a healthy relationship, someone who slept poorly because the ghosts of his decisions haunted him every night. He had tried to become a god because he couldn't bear to be just a man. He had created a cult around his own personality because he couldn't accept his own fragility. And here was a man who had found true transcendence by simply accepting his human condition, by embracing his fragility, transforming it into strength. I am a man, not I am the Führer, not I am German, not I am Catholic, not I am superior. I am a man, The simplest and most revolutionary statement possible. In a world where Hitler had divided humanity into superior and inferior races, in a regime that denied the basic humanity of millions of people, those three words were an ideological nuclear bomb. They not only asserted the fundamental equality of all human beings, they went further. They declared that the very attempt to be more than human was an illusion, a dangerous illusion. An illusion that led only to emptiness and destruction, because they asserted the fundamental equality of all human beings. They declared that no matter your nationality, your religion, your race, you are, first and foremost, a man, a human being, with the same dignity, the same value, the same rights as anyone else. It was the complete antithesis of everything Nazism represented, and Hitler felt it. Felt how those three simple words demolished his entire ideology, his entire empire, his entire reason for being. He remained silent for long minutes. His generals dared not speak. The air in the room was charged with a tension no one could explain. And then, something extraordinary happened. Hitler, for the first time in his life, seemed small, seemed human. He sat heavily in his chair, looked at his own hands, and for a moment, just a moment, you could see through the mask. You could see the frightened man behind the dictator. Because in that moment, he understood something fundamental. He wasn't a god. He wasn't superior. He wasn't special. He was just a man who had chosen the path of darkness. The meeting ended in silence. No one knew what to say. How do you comment on something that shouldn't have happened? How do you process an experience that defies everything you believe about reality? Hitler left the room without a word. And according to accounts from those close to him, he was never the same. Of course, he remained Hitler. He remained a dictator. He remained responsible for unimaginable horrors. But something had changed. There was a crack in his armor, a doubt he couldn't silence, and that crack grew slowly, silently, until, in the end, it contributed to his downfall. Because you cannot fight against the truth forever. You cannot deny your own humanity indefinitely. Sooner or later, reality takes its toll. And the reality is simple. We are all human, all equal in our fundamental fragility, all equal in our need for love, for purpose, for transcendence. Hitler tried to find transcendence through power over others. Kolbe found it through service to others. Hitler tried to elevate himself by destroying. Kolbe elevated himself by sacrificing. Hitler tried to be more than human by denying the humanity of others. Kolbe became more than human by affirming his own humanity. And this is where we arrive at the heart of the matter, at the true meaning of those three words, at the reason why they continue to echo decades later. I am a man. It's not a statement of weakness. It's a declaration of strength, but not the kind of strength the world teaches us to seek. Not the strength that comes from dominating, from competing, from being above others. It's the strength that comes from accepting who you really are. The strength that comes from stopping pretending to be something you're not. The strength that comes from recognizing that you don't need to be perfect to have value. Think for a moment. How many hours of your day do you spend trying to prove you're smarter, more successful, more important than you truly feel inside? How many masks do you wear? How many personas have you created to hide your vulnerability? Kolbe understood something most of us take a lifetime to learn. Vulnerability is not weakness, it's courage, it's honesty. It's the only solid foundation upon which a truly meaningful life can be built. Because when you accept your humanity, when you embrace your limitations, you paradoxically free yourself from them. You stop wasting energy trying to be something impossible, and that energy can be channeled into something far more powerful: love, service, genuine connection with other human beings. You find a power that doesn't depend on dominating others, that doesn't depend on being superior to anyone, that cannot be taken from you by any external circumstance. It's the power Kolbe demonstrated in the Auschwitz bunker. The power that transformed a place of death into a place of hope. The power that made a dead man continue to threaten a living empire. And that power is available to you, now, today. You just need to have the courage to whisper to yourself those same 3 words. I am a man, or I am a woman, or simply, I am a human being. And discover what happens when you stop trying to be God. And now, decades later, that power remains alive. It continues to inspire. It continues to change lives because truth does not die. Example does not fade. Light, once lit, continues to shine. Franciszek Gajowniczek, the man Kolbe saved, lived until 1995. 54 extra years of life, 54 years to be with his family, to raise his children, to tell the story of a saint who died in his place. And every time he told that story, Kolbe's 3 words echoed again, I am a man. Not only was Kolbe a man, Gajowniczek was too. You are too. I am too. We are all human. We are all fragile. We are all limited. And we are all capable of greatness. Not the greatness that comes from power over others, but the greatness that comes from love for others. The greatness that comes from sacrifice for others. The greatness that comes from recognizing our common humanity. That's the lesson Kolbe left. That's the message his 3 words carried. In a world that constantly pressures us to be more, to have more, to appear more than we are, perhaps the most revolutionary thing we can do is simply accept our humanity. Accept that we are limited. Accept that we are fragile. Accept that we need each other. And discover that in that acceptance, in that simplicity, in that humility, there is a force that can change the world. Because in the end, it's not the shouts that change things. It's not the threats. It's not power. It's the simple words, spoken at the right moment, with the authority that comes only from truth. I am a man. 3 words that silenced Hitler. 3 words that changed history. 3 words that Kolbe never repeated in public again, because he didn't need to. Once spoken, they echoed forever, and they continue to echo in every act of courage, in every gesture of love, in every moment when someone chooses truth over lies, light over darkness, humanity over power. Perhaps it's time for you to hear those words, really hear them, not just with your ears, but with your heart. I am a man. What do they mean to you? How do they change your perspective on who you are and what you can become? Because the truth is, you carry the same potential that Kolbe carried, the same power, the same ability to make a difference. You may not be in a concentration camp. You may not be facing Hitler, but you face your own battles every day. Battles against the pressure to be perfect. Battles against the need to impress others. Battles against the inner voice that says you're not enough. And in those battles, Kolbe's 3 words can be your salvation, because they free you from the need to be more than you are. They allow you to be vulnerable, to be real, to be human. And that's where the true power lies. Not in the mask you wear, but in the real person behind the mask. You just need to accept your humanity and discover the extraordinary strength that lies in the simplicity of being exactly who you are. A man, a woman, a human being, imperfect, limited, fragile, and because of that, powerful. Because it is in accepted fragility that we find our true strength. It is in embraced vulnerability that we discover our capacity to love. It is in recognized humanity that we find our purpose. Kolbe's 3 words continue to echo. In you, in me, in all of us. They will always echo, because truth never dies. And the simplest and most powerful truth of all is this: you are human, and that is more than enough.